Movie Match Mania, and I'm here, Wildman Will Welfley, as your host, and my co-host tonight, as always, the lovely
Brittany Piper's Pecs.
Yeah, and we got a special three-man tag booth tonight with our very special guest hailing from Columbus, Ohio, but now rocking the mean, hard streets of Boston. It is...
You better believe it, you pikers out there, because it's Joe the Jabroninator Neff.
Yeah. Well, that was fun, guys. So, as you may have guessed, this episode's a little different. It's our first episode of Movie Match Mania, and we have two-time returning guest, Mr. Jabroninator himself, Joe Neff. How are you doing today, Joe?
That's me. Am I the first returning guest?
Man. Yeah, you're the first returning. I mean, if you don't count us as returning, I always count myself as a returning guest.
Well, take that, Tom Savin, because it's the first two-time guest. Thank you. Take your Oscars and all that.
Start a rivalry right away.
Yeah, call him out. So are
Tom
you
can be a real heel, right?
I love you, Tom, but I'm just saying, I'm back. You're not, so.
I think we're a few seconds in, and the gauntlet has already been laid down.
If there's a Living Dead weekend, I might have to call you out in person. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
I mean, we're both about the same height. You're a little bit older than me, but I don't know. I think it would be a fair fight.
I think it would be a good fight. It would definitely be an interesting fight. That would be one for that I would love to call here on Movie Match Mania.
He would probably also walk away because he's smart and doesn't want to give me the time of day. So yeah, that's cool.
I think Tom may give you the time of day. So I don't know.
He might play into
it. He may give you the match you want if you cut a hard enough promo on him.
Well,
he's got the fight, and I know you do too. So I'd pay good money to see that.
The key is I would have to get one of the other guests who's really tall to be my bodyguard.
Jim Crut. You need Jim Crut.
Jim. Wow. Yeah.
Let's get Jim Crut. Jim Crut, if you're out there.
In the helicopter zombie makeup, he could just like tower behind me and lumber along and interfere in the match. I love it.
We'll have to get Jim Crut on here and see his response, but we'll tag him and see what he says. and Mr. Tom Savin, we'll see what he says. So for those of you listening at home, Movie Match Mania was a concept developed by Wildman Will Welfley and Brittany Piper's Pecs here. We immediately thought of Joe because Joe was one of the few astute people that I knew that liked professional wrestling and obviously John Carpenter movies, just to allude to the movie we're watching tonight. Actually, we've already watched that we're discussing tonight, and the match we're actually going to be calling live. Now, how this works is we discuss a movie starring a professional wrestler as an actor, and then we watch one of their most famous match and kind of call it live. So that's the premise of our brand new show here. Are you excited to get in the ring today, Jabroninator?
I am more excited than I could express. And I know my tone of voice doesn't sound that excited, but I'm parceling out my excitement piece by piece right now. It's a steady flow of excitement.
You're doing the Jake the Snake reserve. You're drawing people in with your voice to where
the older I get, the more I take on a snake-like demeanor of just trying to get in your head rather than beat you over the head.
Trust me.
Smart.
Yeah.
Yes, you got to be smart about it. Brittany, are you excited? Piper's Pecs. Obviously, you're going to see Piper's Pecs in this film, and you're going to see him later on in this match. Well, you've already seen me. So are you excited tonight about our very first episode of Movie Match Mania?
Yes, yeah. And I'm coming into most of the wrestling stuff blind, so I give a little bit of a outside of the ring perspective. So I don't know what I'm in for this match, but I do know what I'm in for They Live.
There were a couple matches where people were blinded in the ring, but I digress. But yeah, so it's harder to operate in a wrestling ring when you're blind. So hang with it, you'll be okay. Just follow your instincts.
Follow your nose.
We're with you,
Sweaty
Brittany.
pecs.
Yes, there will be a lot of sweaty pecs. Yes.
Joe, as our guest, would you like to? I love your introductions. I can't put you over enough. When you do your introductions at Shock Around the Clock or the Sci-Fi Marathon, I got to say you have some of the most astute, engaging, and just energizing instructions. Instructions, easy for me to say.
Instructions. Oh my! You make me sound like such a dictator now. Jeez.
Yeah.
Enjoy the film.
instructions and introductions.
Yeah.
We're going to end up on WrestleBotch if they listen to this, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Botchamania.
Yes. We love Botchamania in this house. Just so you know.
I've introduced Brittany to Botchamania, and I think I changed your life, if I may say that, Brittany.
I'm digging them.
Okay.
Although it gives me a very skewed idea of like what's to come out of the serious matches, because I've seen like a few matches, and then I've seen like more Botchamania than actual matches. So
what's better than being a fan and watching Botchamania is being someone who's ancillarily getting introduced to wrestling, but only through a very narrow lens, and then seeing all of Botchamania. So having very little context, but understanding that things didn't go the right way.
I'm coming in at a different angle here.
It does make it seem like wrestling is a fundamentally ridiculous enterprise with some good stuff thrown in here and there, which is kind of true. I don't know.
Yeah. And if I can take that again, one more time, can I do it? We're live, pal. If I could take that again, you do such great introductions. You're welcome. Would you like to introduce the movie we are reviewing tonight?
The movie, it's strange that you ask that, because just 2 days ago, I was finally watching the video from the last science fiction marathon that has actually gone off without a hitch, which was back in 2019, back in the pre-COVID Fantasia days.
Right.
And the last film we showed was They Live. So I watched my introduction, and because, at the end of each marathon before the last film, we always give, we thank all the collaborators and people, and then we just say something about the last film. And all I said was, well, we hope you like They Live. We get a feeling you might, sarcastically. I said, featuring the longest fist fight in history. Enjoy. We'll see you down the road. So now I'm all askew, because that's what I'm thinking of for an introduction is, it's got a great fist fight. They live, everybody. No, actually, okay, I will give you as much of an introduction as I can. Maybe I'll incorporate some of my notes I made for this episode into this. I think They Live is a really interesting film, and most of the time it's because it's spoken of in terms of the socio-political message and the satire. But I also think it's interesting looking back at this film in the context of John Carpenter's career, because I remember growing up, because I'm a bit older than both of you, just a tiny bit.
Little bit.
There was a time where the critical consensus, seemingly, and by critical consensus, I mean kind of mainstream critical consensus, was that John Carpenter, post, say, The Thing, had really started going downhill. That Starman and Big Trouble in Little China were pretty good, but that starting with Prince of Darkness, he was producing work that was not up to the level of what he had done before. And I think it's interesting looking at that critical consensus compared to now, because I think They Live has become a cult classic, and Prince of Darkness has become a cult classic. And a lot of those films around that time have been reassessed over the years. And I often wonder how much of that is just what happens with films in particular and art in general, that it's not appreciated fully in its time. But also I wonder how much of that is just how people view, say, artists and specifically directors. I remember J.D. Salinger, the Catcher in the Rye author, often talked, when he would talk, about the role that his later work played in his career. And he was always disappointed that people judged everything that he wrote against Catcher in the Rye. When to him it was like, well, Catcher in the Rye is part of what I'm doing across my entire life. It might be more well known, but it's a piece of everything I'm doing. And I kind of look back at John Carpenter's career now and look at a lot of his films as that. I mean, it's, in some ways you could say Carpenter has that reputation like David Bowie's had for a long time, where, no one will ever match Bowie's 70s output. And Bowie never really matched his 70s output. But that doesn't mean that the rest of what he did was bad or, dull. It's just different, and Carpenter, I think too, with They Live, with Prince of Darkness, and even with some of the later stuff, In the Mouth of Madness, I think is
I love it.
Probably the best H.P. Lovecraft film that it's not an official H.P. Lovecraft adaptation. I even like Ghost of Mars. I came to that late, and I think it's actually a decent film. The film that changed my thinking of John Carpenter was Escape from L.A. And I remember seeing that in theaters and being really disappointed because it was 1997, I believe. And Carpenter had made such a big deal out of the fact that he never wanted to do a sequel unless they really could do it the way they wanted to. And that he hated bad CGI effects. And then I saw the film and it seemed like, oh, this is just kind of the same thing as the first one. And there's bad CGI effects. What I didn't know until later, I think what a lot of people didn't know until later was that, the production was rushed through post-production. So he didn't have time to actually finish the effects the way he wanted to. But it didn't really hit me like how much I enjoyed that film until, 15 years later, they showed it at one of the science fiction marathons in Boston. And watching that film with some distance, and I know this happens with a lot of movies and art, but watching it with some distance, I was just amazed that it's like, wow, this is a really competently shot film. And it makes sense. And the editing is very classical and it looks really good. And this is like maybe damning with faint praise compared to what would happen later on with movies in general. But it was like, wow, no matter what, even if it's not Escape from New York, it's such a well-made film on a technical level. And I appreciated it more too for the fact that it's almost like a satire of sequels.
Yeah.
I mean, it's supposed to be like Escape from New York, but it's the same old shit over again.
Right.
This is getting far, far away from the
No.
And at this point, the marathon audience would probably be looking at me like, "Come on, man! I just want to watch the film."
It's fun. We'll have you back on when we we'll do a double feature of Escape from New York and Escape from LA. But quick note, maybe we'll just edit this out and save it for that episode. But no. But a quick point.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was saying I actually had gotten the Scream Factory edition and let Brittany borrow it, but I was surprised how much hate there was. But I came to it all backwards. I used to live across the street from a video store, so I could only rent. It was before internet, kids, so I could only rent what was available. So Escape from LA had come out. Someone probably stole their copy of Escape from New York, or they didn't have it. So I was like not even aware there was an Escape from New York. So I watched Escape from LA not knowing the existence of Escape from New York, and I loved it because it was like the music of my time. The music I was growing up with then. It was like Kurt Russell as a badass. It was like, it was funny. It was like comedic. It was cheesy. And then I went back and everybody's like, oh, it's no Escape from New York. And I watched Escape from New York and I was kind of befuddled. I liked Escape from New York, but I was like, that was a lot more serious. So I was like, I was backwards, but I liked it. But I think I had the pleasure, I think I was blessed by seeing Escape from LA. I think had I it been like you, I would have had to gestate with it a little while to like it. But I think since I saw it first, I was like, oh, this is just a fun, stupid, action, ridiculous movie. And I dig it. It's got Pam Grier in it. So come on.
I think it's easy to look back now too at Carpenter's career and say, oh, he has this string of just wonderful films that everybody loves. But people forget that The Thing was critically reviled when it first came out. It was not a success. And The Fog, God, I remember the first time I saw The Fog at one of the horror marathons back at the Drexel North. And I had just looked up some standard reviews for it. And the take on The Fog for a while was, it's okay. It's no Halloween. There's a lot of Carpenter films that are well regarded today that in their time were just compared against Halloween and judged to be insufficient or inferior. They Live, I'm sure part of it is just it's at the tail end of the Reagan era, and that what it critiques is still widely accepted and loved enough, or well, if you take what Carpenter says, it's still loved to this day. But I can see that people thinking either, oh, number one, it's way over the top, or number two, it's too political, quote unquote. I know some people who like John Carpenter a lot, and it's interesting to see how sometimes what their personal politics would be conflict with what Carpenter's politics seem to be. But it's still, obviously what he does still connects with them in some way. So I'm rambling a lot at this point. And
no, that was a great segue back around. Brittany, what were your initial thoughts on They Live?
Well, I saw it a while ago. I can't remember when I first saw it. I don't know. I have a lot of directions. I always fixate on the effects and stuff. And I think the design for the aliens is really cool and kind of jarring the first time you see it. I also appreciated the black and white and all the kind of matte painting stuff that they did with the black and white versions of the world, the real world, all the things you're not really seeing. I don't know. I always I guess you could say noticed the message of the movie, but I never really analyzed it that much. I always focused on everything else. And I always have a lot of fun with all the one-liners.
Oh yeah.
from our stars. But I always thought it was interesting the first third of the movie that he doesn't really say much. He really just kind of observes everything that's going on with the world before he sees what's going on beneath.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because he's an observer. He watches things. He looks for things. He looks for things that are going on underneath, even before he knows, with the big reveal. And I really relate to that. I like to listen more than I like to talk. I like to be in the background. So I don't know. I really relate to his character. The effects were cool. It's a cool concept in general, but I was kind of surprised when I first realized it was Carpenter. Because before I went to college, I never looked up who the director of a movie was. I was just who did the effects? So I actually didn't know it was Carpenter until maybe the second time I went back and watched it, and then made that connection. And then, whoa,
It's interesting when you talk about him being the observer for the first part. On rewatching it, it really struck me how he's such a serious character until he sees the aliens, and then all of a sudden he turns into a late 80s action hero, and the one-liners start. Yeah. And it's so jarring, it's almost like
it is.
I mean, they kind of explain it when he tells Meg Foster that wearing the glasses for too long is like a drug, and it's so intoxicating. But I remember a few years ago when we showed it at the marathon, I thought, wow, so he's just kind of brooding and seeing how things go. But once he sees the aliens, all of a sudden it's time for mass murder, It's so
yeah,
quick.
He flips the switch so quick.
Yeah.
Well, I attribute it to him having to survive, be street smart, because obviously he's kind of a drifter, so he has to be aware. That's how he's survived so long on his own, and just going from town to town, is that he has a awareness. He knows how to communicate, when to talk, what to say, who to watch, more importantly, as you brought up. But I think when he realizes that, I think he was kind of like Keith David's character Frank. I think he really bought into that. I may have a rough life, but if I just show up and I work hard and I can get an honest day's pay. And then when he realized kind of everything is not that way, he's fucked. And kind of there's this ruling class of aliens and people that are just, licking their boot heel, the humans accepting it and whatever, and gaining, notoriety and whatever wealth and fame and fortune comes their way for selling out the human race. He just, has a psychotic break and says, fuck it. And because everything he believed in at that point is kind of crumbles in front of him. That's why, not to jump too far ahead, but that's why I believe later on in the alley fight that I think Frank kind of believes him to begin with, but Frank doesn't want to believe him, because if Frank believes him, then it also shatters his belief of everything that he's built his life and pretty much his character on, in my opinion.
Yeah. I joke around about that, but I guess too, if you all of a sudden saw that the world was being taken over by aliens and no one else could see it, it might have an extreme effect on you. Maybe, I don't know.
No, you were right.
Especially the quiet ones.
Yes, we all like to think, oh yeah, we would handle it with aplomb, but
no. I agree. He does kind of snap, but I think that leads into the psychotic break. But there's no transition. It's just you're right, from 0 to 100 immediately.
Yeah.
I feel like if you were a fan of his, but before this movie and you were familiar with him, you'd kind of be that would be the release for you.
Come on.
Yeah.
You see him for the first third of this movie and you're okay, but this is Roddy Piper. Come on.
Where's the Rowdy part?
I want some Roddy. Yeah, I want the pipe. Come on, give it to me.
Yeah.
So
that's a t-shirt. It's gonna be our first t-shirt. I want the pipe.
Oh my boy. Watch where you wear that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like, yeah, like for me on the other end of that, though, not even knowing who he was the first and second time that I watched it, like I had no expectation for like his caricature from his other professional life coming through. But I feel like that watching it again now, knowing who he is a little bit, like, oh, I see kind of his like wrestling character in his character in this, which I think Carpenter kind of did play up. I know in some of the special features they talked about him, Carpenter and Piper going back and forth, trying out different lines and just kind of winging it until they like got some that they really liked and threw him in there for when he snaps.
Yeah, he would, especially the famous line, I came here to. Actually, Joe, will you please, being our guest, will you please?
Oh, Lord, wow. So much pressure tonight. God. It is, I'm going to mess it up now because I'm blanking. It's, I came here to chew bubble gum and kick ass. I'm all out of bubble gum.
Perfect. Well done.
And I never knew actually until doing a little research, like Brittany, you probably saw the same thing, that was a Piperism that he just told to Carpenter and they took it on as part of the script.
Yeah. They're like, I like this. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I never knew until watching, and I believe it was the same interview on the on the Scream Factory Blu-ray with John Carpenter. I never knew that he initially went to WrestleMania 3 to approach Roddy Piper. So he was he was at WrestleMania 3, which was the biggest at that time, and still holds a pretty high standing as the biggest indoor event attended, because the main event was Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan for the WWF title at the time. So that was one of the major bouts, and then Roddy Piper had a great match against adorable Adrian Adonis where he got to cut his hair at the end. So, but I thought it was crazy because it's like it was birthed out of WrestleMania. There may have been no They Live if John Carpenter didn't go to WrestleMania. So connections between wrestling. And Roddy Piper went on to star in other things like Hell Comes to Frogtown, just to name one, but which is also a great film in its own way. The connection between Hollywood and wrestling, it's like a lot of people need to point out, Hulk Hogan was such a big movie star, but I think Roddy Piper beat him to the punch, especially with this, as far as like great films. I think of great films that wrestlers are in, and it's like this. And then, Magic Mike's okay. And you got Kevin Nash in there. But I mean, are there any other ones? I mean, they're fun films, but an actual great film, like I would watch other than the fact, like I'm already watching this, Roddy Piper being the lead in it is a bonus because, I love John Carpenter.
Yeah. I think a lot of it too comes down to the material you get or what direction you want to go in. When The Rock started really getting into his acting career, he was playing larger than life characters. He was playing, kind of almost riffs on what he was doing in the ring. And still today, most of what he does, it's, he does comedy and he does action and it's kind of larger than life characters. But yeah, Piper in They Live, for being his first film, he has such a real presence and a real dramatic presence, like Brittany was talking about with the first part of that film. He's able to convey so much just through the look on his face or how he observes things. And that's not easy, especially for like a wrestler where you have to project to the back row, 500 feet away. To be able to pull that off is pretty impressive. And it made me kind of sad watching this again because all I could think was like, I wish there had been more movies along the way that could have tapped into that for him. And I know part of it was he remained attached to the wrestling business, and it's hard to be a movie star when you're still doing wrestling most of the time. But yeah, and I love Hell Comes to Frogtown, but that's a little bit of a different tone too.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I kind of wish that he and Carpenter had made something else along the way too.
I do too. I think part of him nailing this role is that, I don't know if John Carpenter knew this about him or not, but it was kind of autobiographical in a way. He left, his home at a very young age. He was a young teenager, and then, ran away to like a boys' home, he became a wrestler just as a means to survive. He was a boxer, played the bagpipes, and then just became a wrestler just to, feed himself. And by the suggestion of his one of the fathers at the home he was at, he's like, hey, he's like, you're going to go out on the street and they're going to rob you and they're going to rape you and they're going to kill you. And he's like, oh, you know all this, huh, pal? And he's like, but here, I got you a match and here's what you do. And then he went out and had his first professional match against Larry the Axe Hennig, which is Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig's father.
That's right.
Got his ass kicked, eventually built up a good reputation for himself, went to work for Vince McMahon's dad, which they always call him Vince Sr., but it's a misnomer, but different middle names. Yeah, so he went to, Dad Vince. He had a big debut there. He got the name Roddy Piper because he would always play bagpipes when he came out to do what are essentially known as job matches. Job matches are when you get a preliminary match where they just want to make the main stars look even better, and then they'll just go in and have what's called a squash, beat the guy in seconds or a few minutes and pretty much put over the star. So they brought Piper in to do a squash match against Larry the Axe Hennig. He had his bagpipes with him, and they're like, what's your name? He's like, Roddy. He's like, Roddy what? And then the guy saw his pipes. He's like, all right, Roddy the Piper. And then that's how he became known as Roddy Piper. Fast forward, he became Rowdy Piper, got a big break with Vince McMahon's dad, like I said. And at the time, I think he wasn't ready for it. He'd mentioned in many interviews that he was kind of blind and a little too over exuberant and trusting because he went around to all the old timers like Captain Lou Albano and Classy Freddie Blassie, and he was saying, I'm happy to be here. And they're like, oh, we don't want you here, kid. Go back down south. And he thought he was joking, but then he went out to have the match and went to play his bagpipes. He said he blew on his bagpipes, no sound. They had taken toilet paper and like shoved him into his bagpipes and kind of sabotaged his debut. So kind of ruined his debut in New York. And it took him a while to get back there. But when he did, he had one of the biggest rivalries of all time with Hulk Hogan. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So I digress back to the film. Joe, I do have a personal question for you because just knowing you from the marathon, becoming your friend over the years, I never had a one-on-one discussion with your love about professional wrestling. You always would drop hints, and I'm like, I wonder if Joe's a wrestling fan because you would drop seeds, but we never had a full blown discussion. Like, yes, I like this, and I like this era, and this is for me, and this isn't for me, and X, Y, Z, and this is the kind of matches I like. Here's what I think's great about it. So, would you care to pontificate a little bit about what got you into professional wrestling, and then we'll get back to the film.
Some time ago, I told Bruce Bartu, who is my partner in crime for the Columbus Marathons, I told him that I had grown up watching professional wrestling. And he didn't know that, and his response was perfect. He said, well, that explains a lot. Which might be more true than you might have understood. Wrestling for me was, I think I said before that I kind of knew what wrestling was, but it was WrestleMania 2. I forget why. I don't know if we got this on pay-per-view or if they had like a free repeat showing of it or something. But I remember watching WrestleMania 2 and the Piper Mr. T boxing match, the infamous boxing match, and the Battle Royal with Andre the Giant winning, and then the Hulk Hogan King Kong Bundy main event, which I have this vivid memory of. I'm watching it and someone says, can we turn it? And my dad says, no, you got to leave it on here. He's watching his hero. And even then I thought, nah, dude, I hate Hulk Hogan. I always hated Hulk Hogan. We'll have to talk about that later with the Piper Hogan rivalry. But I just kind of got into it because I think in part I look back at my childhood, and I think a lot of times when you're a kid, and especially back then when you were a kid and TV was the main entertainment source, you tended to watch a lot of things just because they were on. There are so many things I think of that I watched as a kid that today I think, why would I watch that? It's not that good. But, it's on. It's something. It's whatever you have in front of you. But wrestling, I got into, I can credit part of my wrestling fandom with one of my friends from grade school, Alvy. Alvy was a big wrestling fan, and he's the one who told me about WrestleMania 3. And then I started watching the WWF Superstars of Wrestling show syndicated on Saturdays. And that kind of got me hooked. And Randy Macho Man Savage was easily the guy who I fell in love with first because, he was crazy and larger than life and had this ring persona that was so intense, but he also was like a really great wrestler. And when you're 10 or 11, you're like, oh, that guy's so cool. Oh my God. Especially maybe when you're a 10-year-old guy. I didn't quite like register the whole like macho man abusive boyfriend thing back then, but
we'll talk about that on Dark Side of the Ring.
I know that was implicit.
Right.
But yeah, it was great. I love the Honky Tonk Man when he became Intercontinental Champion, because I guess even at that age I had a naturally contrarian personality, and so this guy who wasn't a good wrestler but was an awesome heel, I thought, yeah, this is the guy. And then it really expanded for me in '88 when I discovered what then was known as NWA, the Jim Crockett Promotions show on TBS, and discovering Ric Flair and the Horsemen and the Midnight Express and Sting and all people like that. It was just like it was a different side. I used to read the wrestling magazines back when I was a kid. I knew it was fake, but
so are movies.
Committed a cardinal sin there. Yeah, so movies.
yeah. That's what that would be the deterrent, or everybody that would try and talk down to me about it would be like, well, it's fake, right? And I'm like, yeah, but so are action movies, and so is this, and so is that. So it's like, so are plays. So it's like you're not going to watch a play because, I get there are certain things that insult fans' intelligence, and I like to believe that we've moved on beyond that. But sometimes it's like I want the mystique of suspension of disbelief too. So I think professional wrestling, when done correctly, is one of the purest performance art. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I think it's one of the purest forms of performance art when everything lines up correctly and you can just get sucked into the story or sucked into a match. It literally takes you like to another level, in my opinion. So
yeah. I mean, and it's weird. I think like many things that you fall in love with, if you get hooked as a kid, unless it's something horrible, you can, like amphetamines or something. You will always kind of come back to it in some way throughout your life. It's like what they say about music, that the music you fall in love with as a teenager will always have the biggest impact on you, no matter what, because it hit you at that age when you are a bundle of emotions. So wrestling is like that with me, where I've fallen in and out of it over the years, but there's always a storyline that would bring me back in. In the mid 90s, I kind of would just keep up, and they used to have the syndicated highlight shows, and I kind of know what was going on. But then the NWO happened in WCW, and that was such a great storyline that I got hooked back in. And then everything that WWF did in response to that, and the internet. I think back to when I was a kid, if the internet had been around and I could read about wrestling on the internet, would that have hooked me harder as a kid than I did? Because knowing all the behind the scenes stuff and knowing all the commentary about the business, it's a totally different thing. And there's always something like that. I fell out of things for a while, and then the CM Punk storyline happened, and that was really compelling. And for a while that got me in. And then when NXT really hit its peak, that was something that got me back in too. So there's always something. And what I love about wrestling is that history so far, who knows what will happen in the future, but history has shown throughout the history of the business that there's always an ebb and a flow, and there's always some kind of new idea, some kind of new storyline, or some kind of new hook that will rejuvenate things or make them interesting to a wide audience in general. So
well put.
Yeah. I am still a wrestling fan unapologetically. I might not watch as passionately as I used to, but there's also way too much on. So unless I start earning my main income from watching wrestling and writing about it, you gotta pick and choose.
That'd be nice, right?
Yeah.
I love your input on this, Brittany. You say you're an outsider, but you did experience wrestling as a teenager, as a kid, right?
Yeah. No. I always feel like I'm very outside of it, but when I start to like talk about it and think about it, I wasn't as outside of the ring as I think I was. I obviously knew the big names somehow, for whatever reason, having not watched a lot of wrestling. You knew Hulk Hogan. I feel like you're just born knowing him if you're born after a certain age or a certain year.
If you're a real American, you're born.
Yeah, if you're a real American, you're just born knowing who Hulk Hogan is. But then, like, obviously, like The Rock, and I knew who John Cena was later on. Andre the Giant, I did know who he was as well. So I knew those guys. But like for the life of me, I can't tell you how I knew anything about them since we didn't watch wrestling. Growing up, we had a local wrestling league that started up. So it was just a bunch of, regional wrestlers that were not pro. But my dad, my sister, and I started going to those. I believe it was because my dad was working with one of the guys who was a wrestler.
Oh, that's cool.
And kind of like sucked us in. So we ended up going to all these local matches for a while. And that was a lot of fun. That introduced me a little more to it. I can't say I totally knew what was going on, but I was at a certain age where some of the wrestlers were looking, pretty good. I was appreciating the wardrobes. Some of them, some of them were kind of local,
right.
Not too impressive, but
some guy just down a six pack in the back of a van and just threw on, his singlet,
some tights.
Into the ring.
Yeah. No, it was a lot of fun. I remember having a lot of fun with that. So I got to know wrestling a little bit more there. It didn't spark any lingering interest in seeking out professional stuff on TV. I also don't think we had channels that showed wrestling on in my homes at the time. And then there's movies that started coming out with different wrestlers throughout the years that I would run into. Things like that. So I wasn't completely out of the loop, but I definitely have my opinion over the years has changed about wrestling a little bit, because I did for a long time see it as just really corny, stupid. Like, what are these guys doing? Like, this is just dumb. And sorry. But I definitely had that look on it from our outlook on it from my perspective, not really knowing or just seeing a few things once in a while, and it just didn't strike my fancy. But now as an adult, kind of visiting it again and kind of re-sparking and learning more about it from Will, I feel like it's one of the most unique sports in existence, combining like kind of play, like you're saying, like theater with just physical endurance and strength. It's just, and training. These guys have to be in shape. They have to know what they're doing. They're stunt artists, along with also having to do some sort of theater and play a character all at the same time. There's no other sport quite like it. And yeah, I'm getting more and more into it. I'm appreciating it for different reasons now, coming into it as an adult, along with some funny moments of me not knowing certain jargon and things like that. So Will and I will watch a match and I'm like, what's this guy doing? Or, oh, some poor ref I thought was like a woman with a bad perm. And, so there's been some funny moments there.
To be fair, too, there's a lot of stupid and ridiculous things that go on in wrestling. So
that's why I love it. That's part of loving it.
Yeah.
There are some bad things, but yes.
And well, some of it I still feel is kind of like, oh man, that's just like some real corn right there. But I don't know. I appreciate it in a different way now. Yes.
I think two of the things that also keep me in it are, number one, it is one of the truly generational activities, pastimes for fans. You for decades, you have always seen people who grew up as a wrestling fan because they went to matches or they watched things with their parents, and then they have kids and they take them, and there's such a lineage of it's a cool thing to do, But also it's the crowds. It's for the last year, it's the key component that's been missing is when you have even when you have maybe 15,000 people in a decent sized arena, but if they are really into what's going on, even though 99.9% of them know it is predetermined, it is, it is basically stunt work, like you're saying. But man, when they get into it, that is just one of the best crowds you can have because they are so vociferous about what's going on. And they are so dedicated to every moment of this match, and it's been hard watching wrestling for the last year because you hardly have any of that. And it really does take away a lot of the magic of I think, why you can get into wrestling.
Yeah, the crowd is a character in itself, and especially there are certain crowds, and for better or worse, nowadays or back when we had crowds, if they didn't go with something, sometimes the booker or the creative team would want you to go for something, and the crowds just will refuse, and they will say, no, this is what we want. And if you're not going to listen, we're going to hijack the show, which can be good and toxic. I think on the good side of that, Daniel Bryan was not a character that they were pushing at the time, not in the way that the fans wanted. And essentially the fans just rejected the storylines they were setting up and kind of pushed him into the main event of WrestleMania. So, yeah.
Oh, the Daniel Bryan story. When you hit on that, you talk about the combination of that business in real life when they had Connor, and I forget his last name, who's the kid behind Connor's Cure, the charity, the cancer charity.
He was from Pittsburgh. So.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
There's the connection.
Pittsburgh connection. We always get there.
The moment when Daniel Bryan overcomes the odds, wins the world title, and there's Connor in the front row, and he goes over and hugs him.
Yeah,
it's like that is such an amazing moment, and you don't get that when people win the Super Bowl. You don't get that when someone wins the World Series. They might go over and hug their family if they're there, but that's like, that's some real magic to be able to do that. I think too, it's I'm kind of spitballing here, thinking about it, but I guess it's appropriate for They Live that it is easy in the modern world to be cynical about a lot of things, and especially to be cynical about sports, because sports anymore are increasingly about who has the most money, who can, outlast everybody else with, the players that they can afford to have. And then, wrestling by far is not a lily white sport in any way in terms of money or anything. But I think the fact that people en masse, especially with crowds, can buy into something that they know is fake, but it is a healthy catharsis, like movies. It's why when you go to movies and if the crowd's into it, it's wonderful. It's when you talk about the marathons. The best moments of the marathons are where the crowd reacts en masse to something, even they know it's fake.
When the crowd pops,
it is. Yeah. And Will, when you talked about having to get over, man, for the history of the business, that's been such part and parcel that you as a wrestler have to get over with the crowd. And if you don't, most likely, give or take here and there, you won't have much of a career. So there's kind of a secondary thrill of watching if someone connects with the crowd in a certain way. It's really cool.
That's awesome. I'm glad that really illuminated things. In the scheme of They Live, I think to wrap it back around, I think that's why Roddy Piper is such a great leading man, because he had that connection with the fans to make you believe in whatever he was wanting to do, and not only make you believe, make you want to believe in Roddy Piper. And I think that's why his role is Nada probably, I don't want to say it's underrated, but I think I put Nada right under Snake Plissken for John Carpenter characters. I'm not really but I'm just saying, I think he's toe and toe. I think if Roddy Piper could have lived, I would have loved to see like a Nada Snake Plissken team up. I think that would have been something fun.
Yeah.
No arguments here.
Yeah, I don't know how that would have worked, but
it is interesting seeing Piper in the lineage of Kurt Russell for Carpenter leading men, like action type leading men, and you can see it's a pretty natural progression. I also thought like Kurt Russell and all the Carpenter films he did, only one of them is one where he's really playing someone who's kind of a very serious character, which is The Thing. And the other ones, there's a certain level of self-awareness and a certain level of kind of satire about the characters he's playing. But Piper, for the most part, in this role is kind of playing it straight down the middle, albeit with 80s action hero catchphrases.
And hair.
And hair, yeah.
But his hair is great. Let's just kind of pop around, talk about some of our favorite scenes before we get in the match, because we're going a little loose here. We're just calling in the ring, so
and the fans are revolting at this point. Wrap it up, come on.
We're gonna bring the fans back in here. We were letting them down a little bit. Now we're gonna bring them back up. So
we've been doing the equivalent of going outside and hitting each other with chairs for 20 minutes.
So now we're gonna roll back in the ring.
Yeah.
So I'll toss it to you. I'll toss it to you first, Joe. What were some of your favorite moments, or just some of your favorite elements of this film? Obviously, we've gone on about Roddy, but there's so much to unpack about this movie. What did you really dig, and why did you choose to show it at the marathon?
Well, Keith David, to me, is talk about alternate careers. I would love to live in a world where Keith David was just an A-list action star, because I love that man. And everything he's in, he talk about presence. Keith David has such presence in every role that he does, and he's kind of been consigned to being supporting characters or character actors or things. But the fight scene, the ridiculously long fight scene, which I love in the Scream Factory extra, I'm sure you guys saw, when the interviewer says to Carpenter, "Did you think about cutting the fight scene down?" And Carpenter immediately says, "Fuck no."
Right.
No hesitation.
I mean, I think it takes guts to leave something like that in uncut, because it does cross over into kind of a ridiculous thing. But it's fun, and it's so compelling. This time, watching that fight scene, I was reminded, again, kind of going off the reservation here for a second slightly, but there's a great Paul Schrader film called Blue Collar. I don't know if either of you have seen it.
But I like Paul Schrader, so I'll have to check it out.
1977, I think it is. It's Harvey Keitel, Yaphet Kotto, and Richard Pryor.
Ooh.
And they all work in a Detroit automobile factory, and they're all struggling financially in one way or the other. And so they conspire to rob the local union office's safe, and problems ensue, blah, blah, blah. But there's this underlying theme throughout the entire movie of how the people in control, they pit you against each other. And even when you think that you'll stay together, they subdue you by pitting you against each other eventually. And it really struck me watching the Piper Keith David fight in this one, that especially for the type of guys they are and for what they're going against, it's that made literal. It's them literally beating the shit out of each other, pitted against each other essentially by this system that has been set up. Still relevant. God, I mean, it's, all these years later, it's, if you just watch it in that way, it's like, wow, these guys who are trying to make their way, and yet all they can do is fight each other, and all they can do is, their time is taken up by this as opposed to seeing what's going on. I love that scene. And it's every time I think, wow, one of them should have a broken back at this point. But
right.
The magic of the movies.
Absolutely. It's the suspension of disbelief. It's what us wanting to believe. It kind of is the closest thing at that point to a cinematic wrestling match, I would say. It was very, and John Carpenter said, there was 3 specific wrestling moves he wanted to see in the fight. There are great moments in that fight. You talked about Keith David, and he has a great little monologue, which I'm going to paraphrase, but he just says, you and I are playing essentially the same game, and it's called life. And he's like, and I'm going to do my best to get over, and you're going to do your best, but people are going to try and fuck each other over to get there, essentially, is what the point of what he's making. And it's kind of akin to what you were saying. It's like, I can't do it justice, but it really hits hard. That's one thing I noticed this time. It's like, yeah, this is a man who loves his family, who's like living in a shanty town. It's a nice shanty town. We were pointing.
They have TV.
They have TV. They have a couch.
They do.
And a couch potato.
They have the food looks great. They're rocking Ray-Bans. So I mean, they're doing something. They're doing something right in the shanty town. But I agree. I think that's great. I think the fight scene, for multiple reasons, and the one moment, and maybe you speak to this, where Roddy goes to hit him with a board, and like almost like hits him and it fucks him up, and then like kind of says, oh shit, I'm sorry, because he realizes it's still his friend and he doesn't want to
break the car window. Yeah. Well, it's like, and what, doesn't Keith David laugh a few times during the
when Frank breaks the bottle, he like Piper laughs at him, and then he gets pissed off. But yeah, they start laughing at each other. He's laughing that like Piper's crazy and won't give up the fight. But also one of the best lines, put these glasses on or start eating that trash can. I think that's very underrated.
I wondered too, thinking about it, if part of the reason why They Live struggled to kind of find an audience back then is what we're talking about, which is it's a film fundamentally about people who are poor.
Right.
And who are completely struggling and on the margins. And even something like Prince of Darkness is about college students and professors and religious authorities, but it's people living on the outskirts of society as the protagonists. And the 80s action model was so much about the triumphalism of the American spirit. It's Rambo, it's Schwarzenegger, it's it's Mel Gibson and Danny Glover as heroic cops who are just, trying. One's kind of crazy and one's kind of stable, but they're both ultimately living fairly decent lives. And to watch something like this where the main characters are essentially homeless and are just scraping by at best and discover this stuff, maybe that was off-putting in some ways,
I heard somewhere Keith David had stated that the film did really well and then it disappeared.
Yeah.
And their response was somebody didn't like it. So maybe it did. Maybe someone, this is what I accredit some of the best art films and underground films from being introduced from you to me seeing them. And then in turn, I try to introduce them to other people or go out and be more, adventurous with what I watch. And to the point where I don't want to become snobby. I'm not, I purposely don't, but I was like, well, this is a cool horror movie. They made this on a lower budget and these guys had heart. So I'd rather watch this than The Conjuring right now or whatever. And not to knock that, but for a studio system in the time of the 80s when blockbusters were making money, to have a movie come out and say, hey, it's not about money, or you're being controlled, you're being led by your nose and like, it's time to wake up. I don't see many movie studios digging, that vibe, that message,
Yeah. Well, and I like a lot of those, big budget.
Me too.
Stereotypical blockbuster movies. But I'm reminded of something that the author Chuck Klosterman once said when he was talking about the difference between 80s hair metal, including like Kiss, and early 90s alternative grunge rock. And he said that to him, the main difference between those bands was the 90s bands are saying, hey, we know you're really depressed or you're living, and things are hard. And guess what? We are too. We sympathize with you. But the hair metal bands, and I bring up Kiss because I think they were the ultimate example of this. They were saying, hey, guess what? We're really fucking cool. And guess what? By liking us, you're also really fucking cool. Join the party. And that was the Kiss Army, and that's a profound difference. And that's not saying, liking Kiss is like makes you a terrible person. But thinking about They Live, I mean, it's these characters are not like the aspirational characters you think of in a typical late 80s action movie. They are saying, we're like you, we're struggling. In fact, we're probably struggling more than you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic watching it. And today, I mean, it's so different because there's so many other layers of meaning and fandom that people have applied to that for decades.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I also don't think listening to Kiss makes you a bad person. I just think being in Kiss makes you a bad person.
Well... You got to sell those Kiss coffins.
You've got to. Kiss, to digress, this is why I love having you on, because we'll just talk about everything. To digress, Kiss proved that they were so cool that they wrote a song about that you were being oppressed because you were a Kiss fan. It's called Crazy Nights.
And Kiss, who had a deal with World Championship Wrestling in the late 90s to have the Demon, their character, to be a recurring character. So it all ties in together. See?
It does all tie in.
I planned that. I stayed up nights planning this connection, just casting out the stream and then bringing it back in.
Way to bring it back around.
I try.
Back to They Live, and we'll get your opinion here in 1 second, Brittany. Alice Cooper, I believe, was Kiss sued by Alice Cooper, or was Alice Cooper sued by Kiss for the makeup?
Oh boy, I actually, believe it or not, and I'll have to turn in my fan card for this. I don't know. I've never heard that story.
There was anyone out there who listens to this, feel free to comment. But I believe Kiss sued Alice Cooper for his use of face paint or some, which even though he was out first, it was something weird, but there was some kind of disconnect. But that being said, Alice Cooper's manager, Shep Gordon. Yeah.
Shep Gordon. Yeah.
Shep Gordon who
also executive produced They Live.
Exactly. So now we're back. And Brittany, your thoughts. Thanks for the hot tag, Jeff.
Brittany, Shep Gordon, take it. Yeah.
Hot tag.
My favorite scenes. Is that what we're talking about still? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I love it. This is great. Obviously the fight scene, specifically Keith David's, and his stubbornness just to the core to not put on those sunglasses. For however many reasons he was not going to put those on. And I love how far it went of him just being like, no, I'm not doing it. And then at one point it seems like he's gonna, and he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. But I love the opening scene. I never get tired of the opening scene. We have like a dolly shot coming down. You got a train yard, and then the train ends and reveals our star, our Piper, just walking with his bags, a true little wanderer, wandering into his next city or part of the city, wherever he came from. We don't know. And then you got that great little, kind of looping, connecting sound that we get throughout the film that just fits perfectly with what you're seeing in that opening shot. I think it really sets everything. It just sets the tone for the whole first half of the movie, at least, and just tells you so much about him without saying anything.
It made me feel this time watching that opening scene the score is so perfect because for 5 minutes, it's almost like a trance. The way that it's shot, the way that it's cut, and it totally gets you into that mood of everybody's asleep, essentially.
Yeah. It kind of matches his footsteps too, like almost like he's a machine or something, you know. He's just kind of moving to the beat, just going where his feet take him.
Alan Horwath, right?
Haworth, yeah.
Haworth, yeah. And yeah, the harmonica. I love the harmonica line in that. And it's like you said, it's jangly and it moves to his cadence. And it kind of
Yes, I love anything with a harmonica.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put one more little scene in there. I love when he goes into like the grocery store or whatever. And just like the best lines on all these like alien beings. Like I can't even remember what he says now. It's probably in there. I should have looked it up. But just talking about how ugly this woman is, you know, just him dissing on everybody. It's so funny the lines he comes up with, describing these horrible, hideous aliens that he's seeing for the first time before, you know, tripping over something, falling all over the place and running out like a crazy person.
This one, not too bad. This one, real fucking ugly.
Yes, they're so good.
Yeah.
Those are all good. So those are probably my favorite for like totally different reasons. Like one's funny, one's like just a great fight scene, and then one is like setting the tone.
I'll have to agree with both of you guys. The fight scene is probably my favorite scene, and I, always look at stupid shit and unpack it. Like I probably look too deep into things that don't deserve it. I kind of think the fight scene is an allegory for the entire film. It's that people don't want to wake up. I think, and I don't know if John Carpenter explicitly did that and made it that long, that like people fight hard not to wake up. I never thought of it before that until I really watched it this time, because like before everybody is just so like invested in, wow, how long is this fight scene, or it's just ridiculous and it's over the top. But when I looked at it from the angle of maybe he's saying something with this, maybe he's saying that we fight and people try to put us on the right track, but we just say, fuck you. No, we're doing it. We're on our path. We don't want to hear your bullshit. We don't want to see conspiracies. We don't want to see what the truth is. We'd rather live in ignorance and walk on. And I really believe that. The more and more I think about it, I think that's why it's kind of over the top. It's like a marriage. It's like professional wrestling. It's like a marriage of theatrics, but there is, there's some art to it. And I that's my personal belief of what that fight scene represents.
Have you guys ever heard of the British documentary filmmaker Adam Curtis?
No, I'm not as cultured as you. That's why we have one.
I just watched.
I might have seen a doc without knowing it was him.
Yeah. So Adam Curtis has been making documentaries for the BBC for probably 15 or 20 years now, and they're all kind of variations on the same thing, which is they all are essay films that are collages of publicly available material, and he narrates them. But he always draws in these big central themes of, here's how history progressed, but why did it happen this way? Why did machines become so prevalent in society? He did one 4 years ago after Trump was elected called Hypernormalization, which was about like the weird path that history takes. And he tied it in with Bashar al-Assad from Syria and how Assad became who he was and the connections to other world events. He has a new series, or a new 6-part documentary series that is on YouTube. He has a YouTube channel that I think he's posted half of the series so far, called Can't Get You Out of My Head. And it's all about how in modern history, power structures have not wanted to be replaced, or have suppressed revolutions, or have people who think that they're revolting against a power structure end up failing. And he says, well, why has it happened that way? And he goes through these incredibly complex connections between a lot of different power structures and people you'd know and people who are lesser known. But at the end of the third part of it, he talks about the point of the mid to late 70s and all these failed revolutions that happened. And his thesis was, at some point, the message that was given was, it's easier to care about nothing than to care about something and fail spectacularly. And to him, it was the learning to care about nothing that began to take over a lot of culture, because it's comforting that way. Yeah, I think you're right that a lot of the world that they live is set in, especially in the late 80s. It's much more comforting to just follow along because, in real life, it's uncomfortable to think about, say, where the money that you spend on that shirt goes, or what your everyday actions do, how they affect someone in a third world country, let alone discovering that the world has been taken over by aliens.
Yeah, in the literal sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it can be a rabbit hole. It's overwhelming and stressful, and you can drive yourself crazy like that. Seems, but
yeah, it's completely insane. And we live in a world that it used to be a 24-hour news cycle. Now it's a 20-second news cycle. It's insane, and we live from headline to headline and blip to blip. And yeah, if you really choose any one rabbit hole, if we're talking about conspiracies, I'll throw out because I'm a Neanderthal, I'm reading comic books. No, I'm just kidding. But there's a cool comic series.
I read comic books too. Come on, I learned how to read from comic books when I was a kid.
Me too, actually. So
I'm not always wearing the beret and smoking the cigarette. Don't worry.
That's why we like the beret and the cigarette. But we also like when you're holding the Paps or whatever.
That's me.
we
you
like,
can pull off both, right?
We like the sacred and profane of the Jabroninator.
Totally.
Department of Truth, written by James Tinian IV.
Oh, yeah.
It's a new comic book out. I am recommending it to everybody. Essentially, it's like an X-Files style where you find out that there's a Department of Truth and they're going up against another department called Black Hat. But what happens in this world essentially is beliefs are like tulpas. They start to exist if enough people believe in them. And it's really cool. So it's a really cool concept to go down that rabbit hole where it's like, where you say it's easy to believe in nothing, but also the power of belief. What if it could actually manifest?
Oh,
yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
One of the things Curtis brings up in his newest documentary is that moment in the mid 70s when a lot of the popular conspiracy theories that we now think of today as being decades old conspiracy theories really began to take hold. And it was because around that time, people were finding out about real life conspiracies that did happen, like the CIA, the church hearings when the CIA revealed that they had been overthrowing governments for decades, or the Pentagon Papers, and they're finding out about these things, which makes the other conspiracy theories a little bit more believable, and it starts to creep in a little bit, and then you get to They Live. And I did find it interesting that like once Piper learns all about the aliens, so much of that from that point on is what we take today as like the standard script for QAnon, which is a ridiculous belief that is that no one would believe and leads to violence. Like that's like Pizzagate,
Yeah.
Except in this case, it's real, and the whole underlying subtext is from a very like leftist liberal perspective.
Right.
What that means, I don't know. But I know Carpenter had to come out a couple years ago and explicitly state on Twitter that They Live was not an anti-Jewish film, that it was what he said, it's all about yuppies and unrestrained capitalism and has nothing to do with Jewish control of the world, which is slander and a lie. So it's a thin line.
So that's, well, we know now that John Carpenter is not a fan of Cara Dune, so that is good. And, so no, that's good. Yeah, it's weird because conspiracies are kind of like guns. They can be pointed either way. Yeah, I could see that. I could see somebody, seeing this, and some people just want to watch the world burn, as the Joker likes to say. But so some people are just looking for conspiracies. But
well, it's easy when you had like, this is 1988 when this film comes out. That's 14 years after Watergate happens, which is one of the biggest destabilizing events in modern American history, destabilizing in terms of taking away people's faith in institutions. And ever since,
I think we've had 3 this year or this past year.
Yeah, we're on fast forward in terms of that. We don't even get time to savor, a giant conspiracy like Watergate. No, No, but I mean, he's like, it's like 14 years at that point into a lot of the loss of faith in American institutions. It becomes so much easier when you start losing faith in institutions to believe anything because the institutions aren't looking out for you. So this other stuff, it can't be that much worse, right? Which I think is even more interesting in today's viewpoint, because you have seen institutions fail people again and again and again in this country for a long time now. But that might be for another podcast and another topic and another discussion. Who knows?
Well, it ties in there. This is a conspiracy, but and they live the conspiracy just happens to be real. One of the things that I did notice, and I did actually, I'm referencing IMDb, the trivia page as well, that they were using PKE meters when they were the guards, the alien guards, when they were running through the alien base later in the movie. Mm-hmm. If you look closely, they're holding PKE meters for some reason.
Is that? Okay.
And I think Brittany and I were watching it together, and I said that, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure those are PKE meters, but I never noticed that before. But it's funny to digress into a little more lightheartedness, like how like things probably just get used, or when you're on a budget, you're like, these guys work on all kinds of different sets, and they're all friends. He's like, yeah, throw this in your movie. No one's gonna notice, or maybe they will notice, like Easter eggs. So
does that mean the Ghostbusters sold out?
I don't know if the Ghostbusters sold out, but
they sell their technology? Wow. How disheartening.
To the Andromedans or whatever. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
They wanted to retire.
I wanted to talk a little bit about how great Roddy Piper looks without a shirt in this film. This is probably the best shape of his entire life. I don't know. I mean, he looks stacked. He looks jacked, and he did admit to doing like one cycle of steroids at one point, but I think this was around that time. But
no,
he just looked he looked the part. He really he upped his game for this film, and I was a fan of him. It wasn't like over the top like Arnold or Rambo, but he looked like a believable ass kicking machine.
Well, I forget, was Piper in the video for Pile Driver the song?
He was in a music video, wasn't he?
He was in the Goonies Are Good Enough music video, which is which is a Venn diagram of things I love all come together. But the Pile Driver, I don't remember. I don't remember him in the Pile Driver video, to be honest. He may have been. He was in the Land of a Thousand Dances video, which was good.
Yeah.
And Goonies Are Good Enough, which we will probably just do a bonus episode on that alone. I could go off on.
Brittany, have you ever seen the video for Pile Driver the song?
I don't think so.
This was the second album that the WWF put out. And the lead song was called Pile Driver. And there's a music video with it. And it's all the main WWF baby faces on a construction site. It's just like the beginning of They Live. And so they're all like with tank tops or no shirt. And they're all just like, sweaty pecs and everything. It's
I don't know how I haven't seen this.
Oh, it's something. Yeah.
So on our next episode, we'll bring Joe Neff back and we'll discuss Pile
Driver the album, a retrospective.
Get a live reaction.
And all the sociological meaning behind each video. Yeah.
That was a great video. There were a lot of great wrestling music videos too. And actually Roddy Piper did one later in his career when I think he was in between WWF and WCW at the time, but called I'm Your Man. It was only released, I think, in the UK or Canada, so it didn't get much play. I found out about it actually recently, and it's him like trying to be like a Lothario, a heartthrob, and like just him doing all these things to prove to this woman these masculine, manly things, because that's what women wanted to be wooed by masculinity back in the 90s. So it's like that's what he was doing to prove that he was worthy of her love. And Roddy Piper, I'm Your Man, not a bad tune. It's a bop. It's okay. But speaking of women being wooed by his masculinity, Meg Foster. What did you guys think of Meg Foster in this film, and particularly her character? I thought her acting was awesome. It was just, sucked me in. Heartbreaking. But I don't want to hear you.
Maybe an unpopular opinion, but I thought she was, even the first time I ever saw it, I was creeped out by her. I got like just bad vibes from her. Like as it turns out, there's more to her than they kind of play. But I don't know. I always just had this weird vibe to her. She's so just even when she's being kidnapped, her voice is so like calm and sultry or something. I don't know. She's just like, she just gives me weird vibes in this one. she's a good actress, and she is very striking. I mean, obviously she has some striking eyes. Maybe that's part of it too. Her eyes are like so light that they look almost alien themselves. But I don't know. I just got weird vibes from her in this movie. Even the first time I saw it, I'm like, man, I feel uncomfortable watching her for some reason.
She does have
and I still feel that way every time I
eyes.
watch it. I'm creeped out by her. Sorry, Meg Foster.
Holly.
Holly.
What?
Holly.
What?
I can't do a sultry voice. I just sound like a guy.
Holly. Yeah. Joe, your thoughts on Holly?
I agree with Brittany. I like her a lot. She does have a very specific look, and there's I think a lot of it's her eyes, but too I think a lot of it's kind of weird talking about this because you really play into when you watch a movie how you judge someone based on their physical appearance or like on their face. Well, but it makes sense. I mean, you look at Piper and you look at him and he seems like a very pensive person because that's in part how his face is. But yeah, I think she's great for this role. But I'm the same. I always thought there's something going on here because she just seems very somewhat alien just from the way she carries herself. That, and I think, I mean, you're trained when he talks to someone who works for the TV network, and you know,
that's true too.
There's a decent chance she's the femme fatale in that case. Well, and you know right away that she's calling the TV station right after she throws him out her third story window, which is I love that stunt, by the way. But every time where he's just taking the header out the window and it's like, hey, he's okay.
That would have killed a lesser man.
Yes,
not a survive, but yeah, that may have killed a lesser man.
I mean, a lot of this ends They Live ends up being like a dude's movie for sure, and it's like a romance between Piper and Keith David. But Meg Foster's great for that role.
Right. I do love, so we're not going to go through the entire story beats, but obviously Roddy Piper comes to town, finds out something's up. There's a church of revolutionaries led by Peter Jason is one of the Peter Jason, great character actor, also in Escape from LA and a few other. I think he's in a lot of John Carpenter movies, but he's a cool guy too. But he was pretty awesome in this. And then there was the street preacher played by Raymond St. Jacques, but he was great. I liked him because he could do he had memorized there was this almost like a Captain Midnight for you young kids. Captain Midnight was a guy who hacked into the HBO, I believe it was, and said, HBO is charging too much, no way. And he was one of the first ever, hacker / pirate, pirated a TV satellite station. So that's what happens in They Live. They kind of hack into the system and say, give the speech about how, we are being controlled. And essentially what the Roddy Piper stumbles upon this church, finds these sunglasses, and long story short, unveils the big conspiracy that we are being run by alien overlords from Andromeda. Some humans are privy to it and accept it, and for accepting this, they are, given reward. What I loved, George Buck Flower, once another great character actor. He plays the guy was the guy on the couch. He's in the couch in the shanty town. Everybody else in the shanty town. Potato. Yeah, he's a couch potato. Everybody else in the shanty town works. All he does is sit on the couch and watches TV. And then later on in the movie, they run into him when they invade the TV studio that Holly works at. And they find him and he's like, welcome to the party, guys. This is high society. This is how we're living. And it's like, what? Like, you said all this shit was crazy and this was bullshit. And then he totally buys in and it's just like, just a bootlicker. And it's so ridiculous. But that was one of my favorite scenes. And they proceed to go through and kill all the aliens at that point. Well, most of them. But so Nada comes across Holly after he discovers there's aliens. He kidnaps her to get out of, he pretty much kills innocent people in the eyes of the public, escalating to him having to escape, beating Holly, taking her hostage, her turning on him. Well, in our eyes, trying to save her life, but no, you guys didn't trust her. So when I initially saw this, I trusted her, and Nada falls hard for her, which is weird because he's wearing a wedding band. So it's like, did his wife die? But you can tell there's a budding romance or infatuation on his end. But Keith David gets in the way of that, Frank. So let's bring it up to speed. We talked about the alley fight. Frank's on board, whether he wants to be or not. They rent a room. Then they go to meet the revolution to storm the TV station. Subsequently, we find out Holly works at and is also working for the aliens. What did you think about the end of this movie? Because it's kind of bleak, but it is also over the top and satirical too. So without saying too much about it, I'll toss it to you, Joe. Hot tag.
Well, I have to say that it might be my second favorite Carpenter ending, specifically for Piper's final gesture, literally. I love the ending to Escape from LA just because it's so nihilistic and it is, considering how crappy things have gotten. It's like, well, that's about what the only thing you can do.
Right.
But no, I love that Piper is so defiant until the end, and that final image you get of him is what it is.
I felt like it was abrupt, honestly, especially the first time I watched it. I feel like it was building up, and then Frank just gets taken out, just bam, seconds. It's like less than 10 seconds long and he's gone. His character's just wiped. And you're kind of in shock from that. And then you just move up to the roof and you find out Holly for sure was just not on Nada's side. And then it just kind of ends. He sacrifices himself, blah, blah, blah. Everybody gets to see the truth, I'm assuming. But I don't know. It's weird. I don't know if I was just like conditioned or expecting kind of more of a guns blazing, although guns were blazing at the end. I guess maybe like just a more fantastical drawn out ending. But it just kind of like bam, 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 hits you with all these things right in a row and then ends. I'm a fan of that, especially if I wasn't expecting it. I like being surprised. I tend to like holy shit endings or like anything I didn't quite expect that throws me off, or kind of dreary stuff. I don't know. I'm a fan of unhappy endings, I guess. I like when a movie goes there and does that. Yeah, no. So my initial the first few times I saw it, this ending just ends so quickly. But yeah, I like it. I think it's fitting. I think it works.
My only critique about the end of They Live is I don't like he had to drop his guns when he goes into the TV station because they had he was at an impasse and he had to drop his guns, but he had a secret gun and it was like a little 22, and that's the gun. That's the gun he uses. Clearly he falls in love with Holly. Holly says, just come in, just sell out. We don't know. Maybe Holly would have, Roddy Piper was looking good. So maybe she's like, well, if I can convince him, I can keep him around. He's not, or maybe she was going to kill him. We don't know. But, so Piper says, fuck it. And then shoots the satellite. So to elaborate for those of you who haven't seen this movie, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, but it's okay. We love you regardless. There was a satellite beaming out the signal that made essentially the aliens incognito. The only way you could see them is if you had the revolution against the underground had made these lenses that you could identify how you saw the aliens. I mean, that's pretty rudimentary if you haven't seen this movie, once again, but still. And then later on, they became contact lenses. So they were already they were ready for the sequel already. But Piper finds out the main studio is broadcasting the signal, causing all this mess. It fights his way up to the roof. We lose Frank, killed by Holly. What a betrayer. You guys were right. And then he drops his weapons. He's in a standoff against a helicopter full with like M6 guys with M16s, and he has to throw down his weapon. But he has one little pocket weapon, but it's like the shittiest looking weapon. That's the only beef I have. The gun looks so shitty. Like Piper looks cool as shit holding it. His hair's blowing back, and he goes, but the gun is so fucking. His hand is like bigger than the fucking gun.
It's about a half step away from the gun Ken Foray has at the end of Dawn of the Dead. You know, it's like
the
a
Derringer
little pea shooter. Yeah,
right. It's like, the Derringer, but at least the Derringer had like some character to it. This is like just a small, it's like, that's a baby's toy. No, he blows up the satellite with the fucking smallest gun in the world. And then everybody at that point is able to see the aliens. One thing I didn't notice, bringing it back to Pittsburgh and our connection, is I had never noticed, but now I tend to watch films with the subtitles on. There's a scene where it's aping Siskel and Ebert, but they're both aliens. Oh yeah. And then they say, it's trash like these films from John Carpenter and George Romero. And I never noticed that because it's very low. But he talks about like trashy films of John Carpenter and George Romero. So I love that shout out. It made me love They Live even more. And then finally our ending scene where, everybody looks like shit. People are starting to notice. And the woman having sex with the alien halfway through. And it's like, is it really like, it's kind of like, we're going to give you a down ending, but it's going to be sardonic. He's going to get you one last laugh out of you. So you're not going to leave the theater like feeling totally bummed out. You're going to have like one last hook in there. So that's why I really loved about the ending in this film in general.
Roddy will sacrifice for us all.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Hot Rod. Joe, final thoughts on They Live.
It's as relevant in some ways today as it was back then. I think it's really interesting. And when, part of what They Live taps into was something real, which was like subliminal advertising, and the very real usage of subliminal images and messages by a lot of people in advertising over the decades. And I think in a lot of ways, what it taps into has continued on today in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot of, as William Burroughs would say, there's the word virus of a lot of corporate jargon and corporate speechifying that worms its way into people's brains, and it becomes part of your everyday thought process, and then it becomes part of your everyday expression. Where I'm going with that, I don't know, but I sound like a low rent revolutionary right now. But let's take it off the serious stuff and just say, I think it's a really fun film. And I think looking back, it is, especially on seeing it on Blu-ray, or I guess there's a 4K version that just came out too. It is a incredibly beautiful film. There are so many great shots. And so, you look at the lighting in some of the scenes and you look at the compositions. It is an aesthetic pleasure to watch, along with a thought-provoking film. And Piper, probably his best screen role. So
I gotta agree with that. What was it? Gary Kibbe is the
Gary Kibbe, very underrated. He became Carpenter's DP for the last chunk of his career,
which is on par with Dean Cundey. He's different, but in a good way. Because Gary Kibbe, he did Prince of Darkness, correct?
Yep. Yeah.
And beyond that. So so you got this like the sprawlingness of Dean Cundey, which I like. But then Gary Kibbe had like this tight urban, different cuts. I mean, there was still some sprawl, but he had his own eye. John Carpenter worked with two of the best cinematographers out there. I agree.
Brittany, I should also tie this back into my first appearance on your podcast, that I think this would make a great double feature with Sorry to Bother You, which deals in a lot of the same thematic material, in the sense that they are actually controlling things, and what they are up to is horrible. And considering all the rumors about Armie Hammer, it seems to be very prescient in what was going on.
Any excuse to watch both of those movies is fine by me.
I agree. I will never pass up the opportunity to plug Sorry to Bother You. So
yes,
cool.
Highly recommended.
Wildman Will's final thoughts on They Live are: I didn't see it when it initially came out because I was 4 years old. But
fair enough.
but and actually, it wasn't really accessible when I was getting into films. It was one of the last John Carpenter movies I tracked down because it was hard to find for a long time. But when I finally saw it, I had built it up so much. Roddy Piper, I knew the lines. I had seen, like, I had heard it. I had been like this urban legend that he's like, you got to see this movie. There's aliens and Roddy Piper. It's got one of the biggest fight scenes. It's John Carpenter who did The Thing in Halloween, and it didn't disappoint. It was John Carpenter's main event, in my opinion. I mean, there's Halloween and there's The Thing, but if you're just going for balls to the wall, walking around in John Carpenter's mind, it's one of the best movies there is. It's just like strap in and have fun and just let it take you where it takes you. I fucking love They Live. It's great. 4 stars. So in our main event of Movie Match Mania, we've got the Jabroninator, Joe Neff. We've got Brittany Piper's Pecs and me, Wildman Will Welfleet, going to call this match. This is an epic clash between essentially the face of professional wrestling for many decades, Hulk Hogan, against the star of They Live and our hero, Rowdy Piper. Let me set the stage here. This is in the lead up to the very first WrestleMania. You had the megastar Hulk Hogan. Hulkamania was running wild. He had defeated the Iron Sheik for the World Heavyweight title. The Iron Sheik had defeated the American hero Bob Backlund. Iron Sheik was a invader from Iran. He was the quintessential villainous heel from another country, and he was thwarted by the red-blooded real American Hulk Hogan. Hit him with big boot in the leg drop, 1, 2, 3, and lit the fire to Hulkamania. But not all was great in the kingdom of Hulkamania, because the rowdy one, Roddy Piper, the street smart ass, kilt wearing, bagpipe playing son of a bitch, had something for him. At this era, there was what was called the Rock and Wrestling Connection. Cyndi Lauper had crossed over. She had Lou Albano in her music videos. Lou Albano was a famous wrestling manager at that time. He had been around since the late 70s. And Roddy Piper had brought Cyndi Lauper in, interviewed her, and her boyfriend / producer at the time, David Wolf, brought them in, made a connection that led to what was known as the Rock and Wrestling Connection. Hulk Hogan kind of jacked it from Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper met with Cyndi Lauper in the ring to give her an award, and before she could accept the award, he took it and smashed it over the head of Captain Lou Albano, pushed down Cyndi Lauper, and he kicked her. And this sent like a fucking firestorm through like all like news media, MTV. This all took place, like, was covered by national news that Roddy Piper had kicked Cyndi Lauper, and it led to him getting into a fight with Mr. T on the A-Team, saying that kids are looking up to Mr. T, Cyndi Lauper, and he's sick of it. And Hulk Hogan said, you know what? I'm sick of your bullshit, Roddy Piper. We're going to have a match. And Piper said, the only way I'm having a match with you is if you put the world title on the line, which led to MTV and the war to settle the score. The match we're getting ready to watch right now. Joe, do you have any input on any of this? Do you recall any of this growing up?
Well, I think, as I've told you, I somehow have never seen this match or this program it was on. I used to watch the Hulk Hogan cartoon. What was it? It was Hulk Hogan's
Rock and Wrestling.
Rock and Wrestling. I watched the cartoon.
It was a cartoon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh my. It's something. I watched the cartoon. I knew of these people. I have known of these people. I have subscribed to the WWE network since it started. I have never watched this match, though. Maybe I subconsciously knew this day was coming off in the distant future. That I need to save myself.
You're saving it
for this special moment. Yeah.
I'm glad that I'm watching it with you, Joe, for the very first time. This is special. I was born right after WrestleMania 1, so I didn't get to live into the hype of it. And like you said, at the time, you had started watching at WrestleMania 2, but going back and kind of living it, you have to piece it together because not everything is on the network. You can go check out YouTube, always check for interviews, but cue this up on the internet. We're going to call this match live. Brittany, any thoughts before we go into this match?
As an outsider, I think we might have talked about this before once. When you say babyface, that doesn't mean that they have a fresh shave, right?
That's correct.
Sorry, yeah.
Just clearing up the jargon for the outside of the ringers here.
The old Carney terminology, yeah.
Babyface is the good guy.
The good guys, yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to put that out there because I did not know until you explained that to me last time. And I don't know. I'm ready to see ready to see our man. I'm a fan of villains, and
The heel.
so far the heels I tend to gravitate towards.
So in They Live, Roddy Piper was playing against type. He was playing babyface. I mean, he did become a babyface later in his career, but he's the consummate heel in my opinion. But if you pull it up on the WWE Network, go to 002334. Just type in, do a search bar for the war to settle the score. It should take you right there.
Yes, we're on frame old man with a green poof.
Old man with a green poof.
Oh, context free. That is something.
And
that's what you're getting out of me. So
yeah, I love it.
And are you ready to count it in, Joe? On 3?
Let's do it. 3, 2, 1, roll it. To the dulcet tones of Mean Gene Okerlund. Man.
Roddy, here we see Roddy Piper getting played to the ring by the I'm not sure. Bagpipers, drummers, he's got a whole thing. And he's got a guitar. I love it.
A parade.
Wonderful. And there he is, Cowboy Bob Orton and his perpetually injured arm.
Oh, okay. I was focused on his boxers.
His arm was broken for about 2 years, if I recall correctly. That's
Yes.
Randy Orton's father. But he was Roddy Piper's ace in the ring and in real life, apparently. Pulled him out of some sticky situations.
I love that Orton is coming to the ring and he is not part of the match, but he's wearing his trunks and no shirt.
Is that a staple?
Yeah, definitely. And he's always got like typically a cowboy vest and a hat on too. Oh yeah, he's rocking there we go. He's not rocking the vest, but he's got the hat and the sling. That's a legendary Howard Finkel, ring announcer for many decades in WWF, affectionately known as the Fink.
I'm actually curious about this guitar. What do we got? Like a knockoff? Or is that a Gibson that he's about to do something horrible and despicable with?
Oh, Bob Costas. Wow, I forgot he was in this. Gee.
Bob Costas has a storied career with the WWE.
Yes, he had his infamous interview with Vince McMahon some years later when Vince almost wanted to beat him up.
Yeah, he called out Vince McMahon on some rotten shit, and
Vince
took exception to it. Almost beat him up. But here he seems to be a fan and on the take. So here we go.
I love the vintage Madison Square Garden drop down mic. Oh!
What a bastard
Roddy,
move.
why are you doing that to me?
Consummate heel. I also love that he's rocking the Hulkamania t-shirt.
Yes.
I was always a big fan of the rivals wearing their opponent's shirt. I just just as an extra, put a little extra stank on the heat.
They had that when Hogan was feuding with Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, and Orndorff used to come out to Hogan's music, which is such a nice little touch that no one does these days. But just to rub it in that like he's the real American hero. And here we go.
Speaking of which, one of the greatest wrestling themes, whether you like Hulk Hogan or not, Rick Derringer, real American. Accompanied by David Wolf, Cyndi Lauper, and Captain
and
Lou
Lou
Albano.
Albano. What a crew.
Right.
Oh God.
Hulk Hogan going to get revenge.
I just can't. I can't take Hulk seriously ever.
Look at Cyndi Lauper leading the charge. And that Madison Square Garden is on fire. Look at those people. They're going fucking
nuts.
Going bananas. And Mr. T's in the crowd.
Oh, that's right.
He's getting jacked up. Mr. T and Hulk Hogan were real tight. Side note, Hulk Hogan later on put Richard Belzer in a headlock and then knocked him out and was
that's right.
sued
That's
by
right. He was such a phenomenon. And it's so weird looking back today because the concept of who he was and the character he played seems so foreign to a modern audience.
Yeah, it's weird. It's the 80s. It's the Reagan era.
Oh my gosh, we're stripping already. Sorry.
Yeah. All these half-naked men, my
Oh,
God.
wow. All right. Going straight into it.
Firing up right now. Firing lefts and rights. Ooh, Hogan with a rake. See, Hogan was a face, but that was a heel move.
That's why I think that when Piper eventually turned face, people loved him so much because Hogan preached that he was like the kid, the vitamins and the, say your prayers and all that. But he had so many times where he fought like a heel. Piper was a jerk, but he was always honest about who he was.
Yeah, he was definitely.
I like honest jerks.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Hogan's got like a Ronald McDonald like vibe going on right now.
It was America. Yeah. The red and yellow.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you too, can you imagine today seeing a beloved pro wrestler having thinning hair on top and a mullet?
That was the look.
It was a special time.
Yeah.
I don't know though. Trends always come back around eventually.
This is true.
Ooh, body slam. Hogan going for see Hogan, what an elbow. But you've got, I think Hogan's got about 100 pounds on Roddy Piper here, but you would never know it. It's the size of the fight in the dog.
I don't know. They both look similarly thick.
You know what I miss are the ringside photographers.
Yeah.
You never see that anymore, but it always lent this sense of realism that, there's always Japanese photographers at ringside.
Yeah, it's a world event. Captain Kangaroo in the front stage there, if you say. Oh, no, I think that's just a poor usher. How unfortunately dressed.
God, it makes me feel old knowing I've watched Randy Orton for more years than his dad.
To bring it back to what you said earlier, Joe, the crowd is just, this really sweetens this match.
Oh yeah.
And this was when
kayfabe was still kind of something. And I mean, this is when you had like the old Mid-South crowds where the grandmas would throw things at the wrestlers and want to start fights. And
yeah, Piper. Ooh, yeah. Piper would mention that he'd have to fight his way back. He was such a heel down south, and then he would wrestle in the Mexican territories that people would try and stab him. They're legit riots.
Oh my God, yeah. Now that's a sleeper hold right there.
That's it. That's the finisher. He's on his back. I think Hogan's in trouble here. That's a big chin to get but he's got some big biceps and forearms underneath there. So
yeah, it's interesting hearing Gorilla Monsoon and Gene Okerlund doing commentary. You're so used to all the years of having Jesse Ventura or Bobby Heenan as the counterpoint to Gorilla.
Right. Yeah, Gene's not a bad color commentator, but I prefer him as the interview man, as the stick man.
Yeah. Nope.
That's classic Hulk Hogan. The hulking up. This is vintage hulking up here, Brittany. The no. And then but he hurt himself. Good sell by Hulk Hogan. I will give him that.
No, I was just gonna say that.
A lesser man wouldn't have sold that.
I noticed there wasn't a lot of shit talking before it started.
Well, there had been shit talking up until this. We just got
we're watching that.
We got right into the action. But like I'd mentioned, Piper had kicked Cyndi Lauper and smashed a gold record or an award over Lou Albano's head, and Piper and Hogan had enough.
So in storyline terms, is it actually Hulk Hogan's fault that Orton's arm never healed for those 2 years?
I don't know. I think it's part of it. I mean,
yet another crappy thing he did to somebody. God.
Yeah, Hulk Hogan was always claimed to be this stalwart of American ideals, but he was really
Oh, there's Mr. Wonderful. There you go.
Yeah.
That name fits.
He does. Paul Orndorff, man, one of the great figures of that era.
Yeah, he had a great cage match with Hogan. Photo finish.
Oh yeah,
definitely worth checking out. and they were friends at one point. Ooh, ref goes
Oh,
down.
ref bump. There you go. See, those of you who complain there are too many ref bumps today, it was happening back then too.
Right. Orndorff getting involved here. Orndorff, who had turned on Hulk Hogan. Ooh, with a knee drop right to the face.
Wow.
Outside interference.
That's nasty.
Now, had the referee seen that, Brittany, he would have been disqualified. And this
Man.
is a world title match.
Oof.
They're putting the boots to him.
Because the ref is down. They're kind of going.
Yeah, they're going apeshit on him. Oh, Cyndi Lauper's getting involved.
Was that her? I didn't recognize her.
Yeah, that's Cyndi Lauper.
The other refs are in the back saying, it's not my job, you know?
She looks like the Hamburglar.
Oh my God, she does.
McDonald's theme.
Oh, shit. Mr. T.
Here we go.
Jumping in the match. And now, so it was taboo kind of to have actors in the wrestling business back in the day. Now it's like, now they make, they let anybody come in, but this was a big deal for Mr. T to get involved here.
Oh my God. And people loved Mr. T so much back then.
I know, he's wearing too many clothes. He doesn't fit in yet.
But he's getting the boots put into him by Mr. Wonderful.
Hulk slow to get up to defend his friend.
He's hulking up. He just transformed into the immortal one. Oh.
Okay. One layer.
And the heels retreat.
Oh, no.
Here come the cops. Oh. Look at that. Now that is really old school to bring the cops in.
It's pandemonium. We've got the cops.
Man.
We've got Mr. T. They're just chomping at the bit to get at each other. I miss things like this. I miss when the cops would get in.
Yeah.
Chomping at the bit.
God, wow.
They all got the signature mustache.
Yes. For being as goofy as it is, it lends a sense of authenticity. This feels chaotic in a very real way.
Definitely.
And this was their main base.
Yeah.
Madison Square Garden. This was a big deal. And this was broadcast on MTV.
The guy running the switcher for this?
Oh yeah.
Especially live.
Yeah.
Pressure.
So unfortunately the match has been thrown out.
Now see, that's an early lesson, which is you don't give away the big match for free or for semi-free. You make them pay for it.
Right.
Man, his hair is on point.
Yes.
Who's Mr. T's?
Yeah. His hair's always on point. He never lets it drift.
No, not at all.
And you could make an argument that billing something as the war to settle the score and then not actually settling the score might be a little bit of false advertising. I don't know.
Long live MTV.
Uh-huh.
Hulk Hogan's ready to settle the score. Roddy, number one, Piper rules. So that was the war. That was the war to settle the score. So nothing was really settled, and it was more of a melee than a war. But
I was kind of surprised you did not go for a wrestling movie wrestling match combo, that you didn't immediately go for the classic No Holds Barred and No Holds Barred the match, the movie.
That is on the docket.
Oh my. Now, see, I did watch No Holds Barred, the match, the movie, when I was a kid. My sister, who liked enabling my wrestling habit, decided she was going to pay for it. And even as a kid, I thought, oh, this movie is so goofy. Really? Come on. But that's another day.
That is another day. Now, this is obviously the impetus to WrestleMania, which we will have to have you back on. We'll have to watch a Hulk Hogan movie. Would you come back on?
I love coming on with you guys. Please. It's,
all right.
It's lots of talking about fun and ridiculous things.
We're gonna do it again. we'll and it's not like there aren't hundreds of Hulk Hogan movies, but we have to do part 2 where we watch a Hulk Hogan movie and then we watch the main event of WrestleMania 1, where they actually do settle the score. This was the setup.
I want to see this score settled now. You got me invested.
That's the whole point of wrestling. It was the chaoticness. You get you hooked, and then they pull back. Yeah, it's like they build up. That's another thing. If I can critique modern wrestling, I love modern wrestling, but guys touch too much, and I don't mean like that in a sense of the matches. They're interact with each other too much. It used to be like you'd have to go 3 months before you even see them like touch, and then once it was kinetic, like you'd build and build like a powder keg. That's what we saw there. Is Roddy Piper was just showing his ass. He was kicking Cyndi Lauper, he was hurting Lou Albano, he was calling Hulk Hogan out, he was talking shit to Mr. T, and Hulk Hogan had just had enough, and it exploded into a melee, which led to the greatest pay-per-view of all time, WrestleMania.
You had to make the fans eventually pay to see the heel get his ass kicked, because that's what they want to see ultimately. I will say too, for modern wrestling compared to this era, modern wrestling, there's a few too many times where they don't blow off the feud when something happens. The feud just kind of keeps going, and then it sort of ends eventually, or it fades away. They really knew how to blow off feuds back then. There is an ending you're building towards, one way or the other. It's going to happen.
This was the golden age of the WWF and what became modern wrestling and pop culture. This was the stepping stone to the big unveiling of WrestleMania, and I agree. And you always had to have the blow off. That's how you knew if your career would go on or not. But Roddy Piper was very smart. He was evergreen. He knew how to keep longevity. The match they will have at WrestleMania that we will watch is a tag team match with Mr. T and Hulk Hogan against Orndorff and Roddy Piper and Cowboy Bob Orton on the outside. But
Orndorff?
Yeah, Mr. Wonderful.
Sounds like a D&D character or something from Lord of the Rings.
Now I just imagine Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff as a D&D
Hobbit?
character. Yeah.
Hobbit, yes. Very muscular Hobbit.
Yes.
I love the outside perspective. So, that being said, before we sign off, final thoughts on the man, the myth, the legend, as an actor, as a wrestler, as a person, Roddy Piper.
He was truly one of a kind. And I have heard some wrestling podcasts in the last few years where people who talked with or who worked with Piper in various capacities over various companies spoke about him, and universally spoken of fondly. And people to this day still get very emotional talking about him passing away, because he meant a lot to them. And when you think of what people think of as professional wrestling today, Hulk Hogan's right there. People still think of the Macho Man. But Roddy Piper was like the perfect foil for Hulk Hogan, because Randy Savage was crazy and people loved him eventually, just because he was so good. But he was a nutcase as his character. But Roddy Piper, he was like fitting in with They Live. He was almost like a lot of Clint Eastwood's characters. He was the anti-hero. And even if he did some really crappy things sometimes, you had this respect for him because you knew like what he ultimately was fighting against was authority in some way. And it's too bad he's not around anymore, but one of the greats.
Well said.
Man, I don't know. I like him more and more. And I'm kind of disappointed that I saw him and, They Live before I really knew what he did outside of that. I kind of wish I would have known about him sooner, discovered more about him sooner, but that's okay. I don't know. I like myself a good villain, but you can't be totally psychopathic, right? So like you said, he's a likable villain. You root for him, at the same time, you're like, oh man, why'd you do that, man?
Yeah.
I think he's very solid in terms of muscle mass.
4 stars on the muscle mass. Yeah.
No, he's very solid in terms of his acting. I mean, on the wrestling stage and in films, you can tell there's a difference in the films, and I think that's attributed to just like more rehearsal, like structured lines, blah blah blah. To pull off what he does in the ring, I'm still impressed, and I'm excited to see more matches with him involved, whether they're on the show or outside the show.
Thank you for both of your kind thoughts. I think both well spoken. I'm glad to start this podcast off with a bang. I will say this: Roddy Piper is unequivocally one of my heroes, unmatched. He is on the Mount Rushmore of wrestlers, in my opinion. I put him up there with Macho Man, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and I got to throw Ric Flair on there. I love Roddy Piper. I had the pleasure of meeting him. I never get choked up when I meet somebody, but I kind of did when I met him. He had me come up. I had my action figure, which I'm holding right now, my Roddy Piper entrance grates. And he said, "Oh, hey there. Oh," he's like, "Oh, that's a nice figure you got there. Hey, do you want me to sign anything on it?" And I said, "Yeah, Roddy, can you sign? I was Rowdy before Rowdy was cool." And he grabbed me and he hugged me and he leaned in and he whispered into my ear and he said, "You know what? I was." And then he signed. I was Rowdy before Rowdy was cool.
That's awesome.
Before that moment, he had been led into the convention center. There was a gentleman that played bagpipes, and it was a fully packed 10,000 person convention center. And all you heard was his, the bagpipes playing Roddy Piper to his table, and you could hear a pin drop because that man commanded respect wherever he went. It was the pleasure. They say never meet your heroes. He's up there with Tom Savin, Roddy Piper. Rest in peace. I will love you forever. Rock and roll, hot rod. So, for Movie Match Mania, this has been Wildman Will Wellfleet and my awesome co-host / tag team partners,
Brittany Piper's Pecs,
Joe the Jabroninator Neff.
And remember, if you're not deaf, it's not loud enough. Take it in the ring, in the cage. We will rage next time. Woo. Thanks for tuning in.